If you're tired of making no money in Europa Universalis 5, you came to the right place. By the end of this video, not only will you know how trade works from the basics to the more advanced mechanics of trade, but you'll know how to make money as any nation from now on. I've got some other mechanics videos in the description. Make sure you check those out as well after you watch this one. And I've got a bit of a request. I'm trying to reach 250,000 subs by the end of the year. So if and only if you learned something from today's video, consider subscribing. I really would appreciate it massively. And hey, get the game for yourself. With my link, I get a commission if you haven't gotten the game yet, or you want to get any Paradox game. It would mean the world to me. Thank you. You can access the markets by going to the market map mode. At the start of the campaign, the entire planet has pre-established markets, and every single location is a part of one market or another. That being said, you can right-click on your markets and you can relocate the market from, in this particular case, Sevilla, which is the market center, to another city or town location. You cannot relocate it to a rural location. You also can destroy a market, but it will cost you 40 stability and 20 prestige. Once a market is destroyed, the locations that used to belong to that particular market will be split between adjacent markets depending on the market attraction. The market attraction itself is different for every single location. If we hover over the province of Almaden, which chose to be a part of the Lisbon market, what determined that is the market access as well as the market attraction towards that particular market and the protection that it offers. By contrast, Burgos is 57.03%, so it could likely join the Burgos market if the Burgos market offered it more market access. The market protection is there because Lisbon is not a Castilian market. If it was a Castilian market, we would not have the minus 10% attraction there like we don't have for the Burgos market, but we do have it for Fas. We've got it for all the other markets that are not Castilian. That is actually determined by your control in location, so more control gives more market protection. If we hover over our 95% control location, we get almost 50% market protection, which would be the cap for market protection if we have 100 control. So why is it important for locations to join your market or to not join your market? Well, the more locations within your market, the more goods you're going to have available for trading with other markets. But that being said, it's actually better to have multiple markets in your country. So poof, we just made the Sevilla market reappear. Why is that? Why do you want to have more markets instead of just one major market where you have all your resources? Well, that's a really good question, actually. The reason is because of the market access. What is market access, you ask? Market access is a metric that determines how many goods will reach a particular location. If we click on a market itself, we see that we have goods balance. We have more of certain goods, like in this case, we have more wheat, we have more livestock, we have less of fruit, less of sturdy grains, furniture. These are all demands within our market, demanded by the various locations within that market. And where does market access come to play with this? Well, if we go to the market center, where obviously we're going to have 100% market access, whatever demands this particular location will have, if that particular good is available within that market, they will have first priority in receiving that good. So if, say, we have only 5 tools available in our market, which is literally what we have right now, although we can store up to 306 goods, because if you hover over this little slider here, you see the amount stored as well as the capacity for storing it. The market center gives by default 250 capacity, and then the development within your locations within that market can increase the capacity, as can certain buildings later down the line. These goods available within the market will go to Burgos first. Once the demand of Burgos has been completed, so they got all the tools they need, the rest of the tools will go to the adjacent locations, which in turn will take their share of however many tools they need. But then we go to the fringe locations, say we go in Ocaña, which has 60.77 market access. That means that this is the priority this location has for receiving its goods. if there is a shortage of certain goods in the market, everybody that has more market access than Okania will receive their goods, and Okania might not get any of the goods it requires if there's not enough supply in the market, which means buildings that might be located in Okania might not get the input goods that they require to create other goods. This is probably not the best example because Okania doesn't really have any goods, but let's go to Cuenca right here. So Cuenca has certain buildings that require input. So we go, for example, to the tooling guild, right? Tooling guild requires iron. If there is enough supply of iron in our market, no problem. However, if there is a shortage of iron in our market, and that actually might be the case, it will not receive enough iron to produce the tools it requires. You could, of course, switch to a different production method and then produce more tools or less tools based on the production method as well as the availability of those particular goods in your market. It's easy to actually tell the profit you would get from switching between production methods. If you hover over, you see the cost of various goods compared to the cost of selling those goods based on the amount that they do produce. In certain extreme cases, like with the Moscow market, which is a very big market, if we go to the northern provinces, we have literally 0.00 market access. That means that even if there are goods available in the market, they will not reach this particular location because the location has no access to the market. We can change that by building roads from the market center to that particular location that will lower the transportation distance to market, but it's still not going to be enough. What you really need to do to fix that sort of a situation is build new markets. How do we do that? First, we have to find a town or a city which we think would be a good location to serve as a new market center. In our case here, we can say Vologda, since it's the only location up north that is a town or city, although if we have any other higher population areas, we could potentially turn these into towns and cities like the one in Porog. And once we've got it turned into a town, we can either right click on the market button and then we can create the market, or we can go to our economy tab, markets, and create market, and we can then choose whatever location we want to turn into a market center. Take note, we can actually create market centers in rural locations as long as they have below 25 market access. So because all of the northern areas here have almost zero market access, we actually can create a market center despite them being rural locations. So let's go ahead and get our market in Porog. It does take a few days to create the market. Once created, we go back to the market screen and we see that a big chunk of the northern areas have decided to join the Porog market and abandon the previous markets in Moscow, Kazan, and Novgorod. Why is that? Well, remember we have that market attraction. And if we hover over the locations, we see that they decided to join the Porog market. By contrast, Moscow has minus 20% market access because of the distance between the market center and this particular location. So even though we get the extra market attraction that is determined by the market center being Moscow, the owner is Russia, and the market language is Russian, which is also the dominant language in that particular location. Despite all that, they still decided to join Porog simply because they actually have a bit of market access. We still have the same issue though in the northern parts. We got zero market access, so that's why you want to have as many small markets everywhere. In fact, if we were to build another market in Vologda, we still would do a lot better. So let's create another market in here. Now, if we go back to the market map mode, we see that even Vologda decided to take a big chunk of the northern parts, but still doesn't have enough market access there. So you want to have another market in the northern parts, probably around here somewhere if we got a town or any high population location, which we don't. That's like basically nobody living here. That's crazy. Now, that being said, the difference is that we have a lot of market access around the market centers, so we actually can use these locations instead of just owning it on the map for no reason, just to make the map look pretty or something. If you want an actual guideline for this, I personally prefer to keep my limits of the market around 50 the lowest to 70 market access. So say for example here we've got 71% market access and then the other province has 72% market access. So the limit between the Vologda market and the Moscow market is 70%. That is perfect. That is exactly how I like to keep it as the minimum. However, if I have no other choice, I can also leave it around 57 like is the case between the markets of Kazan and Moscow. But truth is, this would be a good spot to build another market. So in Moksha, most likely we could make a lot more money out of creating another market. Now take note, the Moksha market, even though it is in the limit between Kazan and Moscow, doesn't have locations going into that particular market. Why is that? Here's the tricky part, boys. Mokshan is not in our country. It's actually in our subjects land in Tambov. And because Tambov is a separate country, building this particular market here means that the market is affected by the protection of our markets. We see that despite Moscow having 52% market access is preferred. That is because the market language is Russian. The owner is Russia, which gives different benefits because of our prestige and trade income versus tax base. And the market center in Moscow has decent development, has the Entrepôt building and staffed buildings within that location too. Whereas the Mokshan market, despite having 92% market access, that gets further reduced, of course, by the transportation distance. And then the market protection is lifted, which means we don't get the minus 29.50% penalty, but we do get diplomatic treaties that lower the market attraction by 20%, meaning we end up with 77.52%. The reason the market protection was lifted is because we gave them market access preference. We just removed that now, and we cannot give it again because they have their own market now, the one we just created. And if we go over to the provinces again, they get even less market attraction as consequence, below even Kazan, because now they do have the 30% market protection applied despite being our subject, since they don't have the preferential treatment. I'm saying this because this is especially useful when dealing with other nations. If you want to say expand the limits of your market into other locations adjacent, an easy way to do that is to just give market preference to those particular nations. So if Smolensk doesn't have their own market and they had good opinion with us, we could give them market access preference, and some of their locations would potentially join the Moscow market. But because we have really bad relations with them, they're less likely to accept the market access preference, which means if we go to the locations by the border with the Kiev market, we see that the attraction is on the limits there, 77 towards Kiev, whilst 70 towards Moscow, because Kiev actually has a lot more market attraction compared to us, despite us having more market access. And that's because of the market center is Kiev, and it has the Entrepôt. It also has the trading hub, another unique building. Doubling down, we don't have the trading hub ourselves. We haven't yet researched this particular advance, so if we research it and we build it, we get 10% more market attraction, which is a huge deal actually. Now when we hover over markets, we see that there's multiple nations trading within that particular market. In the case of the Genoese market, the Kingdom of Milan, Kingdom of Naples, France, Republic of Mantua, and the Papal States, all of which have their own trade advantage as well as trade capacity. What is that? So trade advantage is a metric by which the market determines who will get their exports fulfilled first. So if there is a limit on the amount of supply of goods in a market, they get distributed by the trade advantage, which means if the Kingdom of Milan wants a million olives and there's a million olives in the market, they get all their olives, whilst the Kingdom of Naples gets frack all, unless Milan doesn't want all 1 million of the olives. Now that of course goes hand in hand with trade capacity, because trade capacity determines how much a country can export and import from a market. The more trade capacity you have, the more money you can make off of your market. And we see here the trade profit for each nation individually. Also important things to note here are the greatest surpluses as well as the greatest needs, because based off of this, you get an idea of what you should be trading outwards, exporting, and what should be importing. And then based on the price of those particular goods too, you can make more or less money by importing and exporting. We also see the distance from our markets to the Genoese market, as well as our maximum trade range, which is 1,650. That is 1,000 base value with protected trade routes, maritime law increasing it by 10%, as well as 2 of our advances by 250%. The market value is also displayed. Every single market has a different value based on the amount of goods exchanged within the market within within the last month, and the food stockpile. Now, the food stockpile is actually pretty important. Every single market has its own food stockpile. So the markets that we've just created have a maximum stockpile of 6,700. This can get increased. Building granaries will increase the local food capacity by 200. So make sure you remove the market filter if you want to build a granary in all your markets, not just in the market that was selected. The way it works with food is every single market has the specific food stockpile, and then that food gets distributed to the locations as well as to the armies and navies within those particular locations and sea tiles adjacent. And if we go to our production food tab, there's actually a little bonus to having food stockpile as high as possible, because more months of food stored increase population growth. This right here is a good example of what not to do in your game. This is actually one of my earliest runs from a couple of months ago. I didn't build any food stockpiles, no granaries, basically. The contrast between this and a newer run where by 1500s I had almost 3 million more population is simply because of the fact that I managed my country better and I had more food stockpiles, more granaries, which means even if, say, we have really bad season and we're not getting as much food as possible, the stockpile can see us through not only the year, they can see us through an entire decade if we have enough stockpile to feed our population and make sure nobody is starving. So you always want to build granaries if you can. This is especially important later in the campaign when the little ice age situation triggers. If you don't have enough food stockpiles, you will end up starving out your populations, and that would end up you losing population, which you shouldn't be losing in the first place, because population is what determines everything in the campaign. Remember that the goods on the market are not just traded to the locations, but they're used by the population in those locations. So if you don't have enough population, you don't have enough demand, you don't have enough people working to produce more goods. Now back to the trading screen. Why is it important that we understand what the market tells us here? Well, first off, the market owner obviously will be illustrated on the map by having a similar color to whatever the market owner's color is on the map. In our case here, the 6 markets that we currently have a similar color to us. But more than that, the market owner can determine a few things, including can of course destroy or relocate the market as long as it does not have a temporary goods demand that can prevent the destruction of the market. Right now we have a temporary demand of felt hats until 1705. This is meant as a means of not exploiting and getting rid of that debuff, right? Well, it's not really a debuff because having a demand of felt hats means we can make more money by getting those felt hats. You also can embargo other nations. So we can go to countries and we can decide to click the embargo button. If we are the market owner of that particular market, this will block them from establishing merchants in our market or passing through our territories when determining their trade routes. What does that mean? If they want to trade through our markets, they cannot. And not only that, but they have to reroute their trade route. So from the area where they should technically be, they have to go around our entire market. So go to Tbilisi, Tabriz, Baghdad, Damascus, and then reach Alexandria instead of going straight from us to Constantinople, Athens, and Alexandria, which would be the shorter route as it's a naval route. If we also sort by the trade advantage in the Constantinople market, we got 2,200 trade advantage. A big chunk of that is because of the maritime presence in our sea tiles. So if we go to the maritime presence map mode, because our fleets have been assigned to patrol our sea tiles, we've got close to 100 maritime presence in pretty much all of our sea tiles with a couple of exceptions, and that doubles down on our trade advantage. By contrast, the second highest trade advantage is from the Georgians, which have 22. That's basically nothing. Now, another question some of you have: when should you embargo? When should you not embargo? Well, if say another nation has more trade advantage than you in your market, you probably want to embargo them so you get your particular needs met before they do. That's why having ownership of your markets is very, very important, because then you can do that. Otherwise, you will not have the option to, and you have to get your sloppy seconds when trade is distributed. We also see our market stockpile capacity has increased here, again because of the development and market center, but we also built a market warehouse, a unique first age building that increases it by a big chunk, 200 maximum stockpile capacity. So we have 4 market warehouses built in Constantinople, meaning that we can store up to 1,504 of every single individual good. We already have 1,300 stored of salt. So if there's a massive demand of salt, we can use the stored stockpile of salt to distribute that particular salt whilst we're able to match the demand with the production. By contrast, gold, we only have 14 stored, so we need to increase our imports if we want to get more stockpiles, or we need to increase our RGOs. That means go to our gold producing location. So these locations here, increase the RGO is one way. Another way would be to also build the unique Mercury Patio building that gives 100% production output per level. So for level 2, you can get up to 200% as long as you have full employment. So right now we're only getting 160% because we have 800 out of 1,000 employed pops. We don't have enough pops. It would actually be really smart to subsidize this building, but Paradox decided you cannot subsidize Mercury Patios just because, you know, they don't want to make it even more of a powerhouse. How do we change that then? We close the other buildings. Close them. If we close the other buildings, we on pause, we should have enough of those pops redistributed to the Mercury Patio. So look at that. Now we got 200% gold output for the Mercury Patio, and we can just reopen the fiber crop farm and the sand pit whenever we have enough laborers available to work in those particular buildings, which means that now we're producing 48.98 units of gold from this one location alone, because we have the serfdom value, we got the Mercury Patios, as well as the base 16 from the actual gold produced, which is just crazy. It actually is crazy, the amount that you double down from 16 to 48. It's like having 5 gold mines in the country. It's also a good idea to go through all the other modifiers listed in the market screen. Trade efficiency determines the price that you have when you sell your good on the market, so it determines how profitable you're going to be. Certain values like plutocracy increase your trade efficiency, free trade increase your trade efficiency, whereas mercantilism lower the trade efficiency. There's some advances you can get as well, and consolidating trade gives an extra 5%. Production efficiency is the same thing, but basically it increases the output of goods that you produce in your country. Trade advantage can get influenced by the estate satisfaction for the burghers alongside advances. Maintenance can get reduced by higher mercantilism value, as well as by some later down the line advances. Trade capacity can also get increased by a lot of other things that we talked about already. Market protection gets increased by mercantilism, not just control. And of course, prestige as well as your trade income versus tax base can increase your market attraction alongside the buildings we already discussed, with trade range increasing massively in late games with better technologies. Now that you got an idea of how the interface works, let's actually talk about how to make money as trade, as well as how trade works, right? So we're gonna go to our economy tab, click on trading, and it's very important, guys, you do not right click to automate trading in markets. A lot of people do this when they're newer to the game, and that's fine if you're newer to the game, but if you want to learn how to play the game, never ever right click to automate these two tabs. You always want to manually do everything that has to do with your markets. Only exception to that is that you automate the markets themselves. So you left click to make sure each individual market is automated, and then you get to decide how much of the trade capacity in that market gets automated. In most cases, it's okay to just give 100% of the market automation to the AI, because if you still want to have certain trade routes manually done, you can do that, and then you can just go to your current trade routes and you can lock them. Locking a trade route or a trade means the AI will never cancel this particular trade unless you manually do it, and then it's going to notify you at the top of the screen that a trade is not productive, it's not giving you enough money, so it's probably a good idea to cancel that particular trade route. Now, I know the first question a lot of you are going to ask is, how do you get more trade capacity? Well, that's very easy. We go to our production tab, and then we go to buildings, click on burger buildings, and then sort by maximum profit twice until you don't have any buildings that have any profit. Then you start building the marketplace. Marketplaces give you 1 trade capacity per marketplace. In the third age, you can upgrade these buildings to merchant quarters, which will give you 1.5 trade capacity alongside other bonuses such as trade advantage. You get increased assimilation speed for population, and you also get burger power plus 10% and burger trade capacity. That determines how much trade burger pops can do on their own. You also can get the grand marketplace in the 5th age and the commercial center, or commerce center better yet, in the 6th age, this gives up to 4 trade capacity per building. Take note, every single building here has production methods, right? So after you build these buildings that give you the trade capacity, in order to get that trade capacity, you need to ensure that you have these particular goods available for your markets to use. Is this the only way to get trade capacity? No, there's other ways. The market center itself by default gives 2 trade capacity. Fishing villages can give trade capacity. We get 0.25 per fishing village. The wharf naval building also gives 0.1 trade capacity. And also fishing villages increase the local food capacity, give a little bit of sailors, increase maritime presence. So they're not too bad overall. But take note, some of you might be wondering why I built a ton of fishing villages. And this is a side note, but it's important. Pay close attention here. I got so many fishing villages. Oh my God, they're everywhere, but I'm not getting any sailors. Why is that, Ludi? Well, buddy, if we click on the control map mode, because you clearly haven't watched my control and proximity video, which I recommend you watch next, even though you might have a fishing village in this particular location, because you have only 17% control, you get minus 82% sailors. So how much is 82% less of 1? 0, okay? It's like 0.17 or some schnitzel. It's basically nothing. That's why you're getting nothing. You need to have 100% control to get 1 sailor from the fishing village. Other buildings that give you more trade capacity are the market warehouse we discussed earlier. The Entrepôt gives 5 trade capacity, quite a big amount, so you really want to rush for this if you can, alongside the market attraction it offers. The customs house, which is a tier 4 building, gives another 5 trade capacity. The trading hub, another 5 trade capacity. This is a tier 3 building. The port authority gives more trade capacity, again a tier 4 building or age 4 building. And of course, the market village also gives 0.1 trade capacity and 50 local food capacity, as well as some trade advantage, but it also can create certain goods such as tools, glass, beer, weaponry, jewelry, and pottery. The problem with the market village, guys, I'm not a big fan of this building simply because, sure, it has a lot of different production methods, so you can get these particular goods if you don't have any other ways of getting these particular goods. But in most cases, if you have a town or a city, you obviously can get way more tools, way more glass from building these specific goods buildings in the cities that will give way more profit, and it also will employ more burghers, converting your peasants into burghers. In general, I would say you don't want to waste your time with market villages. Instead of spending that money on a market village, use that money to build more burger buildings in cities or towns always, or roads or whatever else the case. And speaking of, I actually want to do a dedicated buildings guide. Let me know in the comment section if you'd be interested in that. I'm not sure how many people would like that, but I feel like a dedicated buildings guide would help a lot of people better understand how everything goes from A to Z. Maybe incorporate that in my economy guide. Now, all of these buildings give flat amount of trade capacity, but we actually can get percentage modifiers upon these flat amounts from advances like the Merchants Guild, which is an age 1 advance, or the additional merchants, which is an age 3 advance that increase it by 5 and 25%. Having the court language, the capital markets language, is also going to double down, give another 5% trade capacity, and the privilege advisory council also gives 10% trade capacity alongside the capital economy value push. There's more modifiers that can increase or decrease your trade capacity, so keep an eye out for them. So now that we know how to get trade capacity, how do we use it, guys? Well, let's go back to the market screen, and I prefer to use my trade from the market map mode, not from the economy trading tab, because, well, this is a little bit more of a newer versus more advanced player sort of situation. If you use the trading tab to do your trades, you will see your current trades, of course. You will also be able to switch between the markets, which have different trades, obviously, and different trade capacity and different needs for the population as well as for the buildings in those particular markets. And you have some suggestions for certain trades that will give you population needs met, or building needs met, or import of food, or profit from exporting and from importing. All of these are not bad. If you're newer, you can go for this and just click whichever gives more money. Oh, look, 5.8. Oh, wow, that's a lot of extra trade trade we've done. So we go to our current trade and we see we're making all this money. But here's the problem with that. You have to take a few things into account. First off, you got to take into account the amount of stockpile of that particular good in that particular market. And then you have to take into account your own trade advantage, because we don't have much trade advantage when trading with Bordeaux right now, which means they're likely to give themselves or other nations that have higher trade advantage priority when trading that particular saffron compared to giving it to us, if that particular nation that has higher trade advantage also has a demand for that particular good. Automating it, we'll try to go for the best options when it comes down to it. If you lock a trade, it will stay there. So if we wait for 1 month, there you go. We got a few trades done automatically, and some of the trades that we did earlier, which are locked, which means the AI cannot delete these trades, are just not productive. So now we're wasting 1 trade capacity, which in turn returns 0 saffron. So we're losing 0.05. Why is that? Because that's the trade route maintenance cost. Now you see some of these done by the AI also are not productive. So in this particular case, we're only getting, again, 0.00 jewelry. Same here, 0.00, despite establishing the trade. Why is that? Because again, trade advantage. So we don't have the trade advantage in those particular markets, and because of that, we're not getting the trades. But is that permanent? No, it can change. So if a nation has gotten its fill of that particular good and there's extra stockpile of that good in that market, you will also get it maybe the next month or 2 months or a year later with that particular trade route. Using the screen, however, is not the best idea. So we're gonna close it and we're gonna go simply on the market themselves. We're gonna click on our market, Burgos, and the first thing we notice is that we have some missing input goods for our government buildings as well as for our population. So we're gonna click on the government building ones first, because those are very important. If there's goods missing for the government buildings, then those particular buildings do not give all of the modifiers. So if we go back to buildings, click on burgers, sort twice by maximum profit, and we hover over the chancery, which is a building we've got in our capital, because it's lacking the fine cloth and the gold, it's only giving 50% of the bonuses, which means it's only giving 1.25 efficiency of cabinet and literacy for nobles and burghers rather than double that. So that's why fixing your input goods for the government building should be a priority. There's 3 ways of fixing that, okay? It's not just one. First one, of course, is importing from other markets. If you have the trade capacity, so right now we do have trade capacity, we can import this particular good from the Zabdbugadu market or from the Tunis market. And you see we already have trade capacity assigned. That means we get a projected profit of a fuck ton, and that's because of the 1.38 amount of fine cloth importing from those 2 markets. However, in the Tunis market, there is a supply of 5.6 and a demand of 6.71. So that means there's more demand than there is supply, which means, again, if we go back to the market screen and we see what our trade advantage is there, we're not even in the top 5. Where are we even? I don't even know. Which means if we on pause and we go to the trades, we see that the Tunis to Burgos trade that we made last month is just wasting that trade capacity. We're not making enough because we're not getting any of the fine cloth. So despite that being green on the map, we got baited, boys. We got baited. Always make sure you trade goods that you have enough supply of in the market from which you're trading, and vice versa if you're exporting it. Now let's go back to the missing input here. The other ways of making sure we have the demands met is by building the building. So we can build a fine cloth building in our capital, which should produce fine cloth as long as we have the production methods input goods, in this case silk, cloth, and wool, which we have, of course, so we should be fine. Similarly, we also can expand the RGOs if it's an RGO good. So if we have gold, we don't have any gold actually, but if we did have and we expanded the gold, then we would have local production of gold in our market. We don't need to worry about it. Same goes for the population needs. Click on it, see whatever is in high demand, try and meet those demands. But in some cases, if the particular trade good is not necessarily really expensive, so that's the case with the sturdy green, importing it might not give you that much money. So if you have RGOs, just expand the RGOs of sturdy greens to meet the demand. You're probably going to be better off that way. Look at this. If we build just a couple of these in these 2 locations, we should be more than okay with the amount of sturdy green that we get. Now that you understand how to cover your missing inputs of government buildings and population needs, let's click on the goods tab. The goods tab is the most important tab. I probably should have started the whole video with this, to be honest. So here you see all the goods in the market, and right now we don't have all of them illustrated. There's more goods in the world, but we just don't know about them. So there's goods in the New World that we'll see later once we start colonizing. There's goods in Asia that we'll have once we discover Asia. Certain nations already start with those particular goods known, so they have a demand of those goods because their populations know about those particular goods. Like lacquerware, for example, which is a good that starts out in Asia. There's a huge demand of this. It's also a very expensive good, and whatever lacquerware RGOs you might have are probably going to be around Asia. They're not necessarily going to be in Europe. There is a building that allows you to build lacquerware in the 5th age, if I'm not mistaken, in building in Europe. But for the start of the campaign, the Lacquerware Artisans Guild is available for the Asian nations, and it can make a buttload of money if you know what you're doing with it. This good will be super high demand also in Europe once it does spread to the European areas, as will be the case with certain New World goods such as chili, maize, tobacco, cocoa, Sagandi's nuts. I'm just kidding. That's not a New World good. But you fell for it, didn't you? No, you didn't. Well, you know what, buddy? How about you hit that subscribe button? Why are you not yet subscribed? Oh, you are subscribed? Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching my videos. I love you. Whenever you're in the goods tab, it's a good idea to sort by supply, demand, to get an idea of how much demand each good has. A lot of the times early on, especially, the food goods were going to be in massive demand. Well, they're going to be in massive demand the whole campaign, really. And then you can sort by goods balance to see what you have a surplus of. And then let's say, oh, we got so much wheat. Let me just export some of that wheat to other markets that don't have that much wheat. Make them rely on our wheat so we can use our trade capacity to export to Köln. Is that going to make us a lot of money? I don't know. We shall see. If it doesn't, we'll cancel the trade route and do another trade route. A lot of the times, it's a best idea to learn trade is to just mess around with the trades, see if you're making money, go to the trade route after, wait for a month after you've done the trade route, see if you exporting from Burgos to Köln is going to make a lot of money. So, oh, look at that. We're only making 0.51. Why is that? Because we're using 3 trade capacity to move around wheat. We don't want to do that. See whatever other good you have in high surplus that also costs a lot. Do we have anything that actually costs a decent amount? We don't. We literally, well, we have a little bit of naval supplies. Okay, so we can export some naval supplies. Where can we export it? We can even export it to our own market and make a little bit of profit off of that, because the southern market in Castile doesn't have naval supplies, or it doesn't have enough naval supplies in any case. In general, though, you really want to make your money off of the really high price goods. So you sort by market price and you see what exactly is super in high demand. Gold, of course. Importing gold is always going to be the best thing, but unfortunately, gold is never to be found. So import from wherever you can, as much as you can. The truth is that you're never going to have enough gold in this game, ever. Unless you go to the New World and you steal all of the New World gold. Then you might have enough. Fine cloth, especially early game, building a lot of fine cloth manufactories and just exporting all of that fine cloth afterwards is a good idea to make a buttload of money too. Same goes for jewelry, but the trick with jewelry is that it has an input of gold or silver. So you only want to build Jewelers Guild if you've got the silver or gold to use as a production method. One more thing I also want to mention is that in almost all cases, having the market capital from wherever your actual capital is located in the same location where your capital is also good. As is the case here, our capital in Valladolid has only 84 market access. So that means we get the penalty of the transportation distance to market whenever we want to export or import goods, which is, as they say in Spanish, no bueno. So if you have the money, of course, right click on your market, relocate it into your capital, always going to be worth it. So look at that. With Valladolid at 100%, not only does that make us more money, you instantly see that we're actually making ducats now, but we also have a change in the distribution of locations, because since Valladolid is a little bit more central, more of the southern locations have more market access, and because of that, they're more likely to join the Valladolid market rather than the Sevilla market. Another important thing to take note of when deciding where your market capital should be is the harbor capacity. Harbor capacity determines a lot of things, including the trade embark and disembark cost, which can make a huge difference, guys. So more harbor capacity is better. So in our case here, the market being in Sevilla is not bad. It's 65 market capacity, or better yet, harbor capacity. But Cadiz, oh my god, Cadiz is where it's really at. You also get proximity cost through port minus 75% alongside a lot of other bonuses. So moving this market to Cadiz also is going to be a good idea. The problem with that though is that if we go to the river map mode, and if you don't know how to access your river map mode, you go to settings, input binding, scroll all the way down, and you have to manually assign whatever key bind you want to bring up the rivers map mode. For now, we don't have an actual rivers map mode, but I'm sure they're going to add it in a few days. I'm hoping anyway that they will as an actual map mode. So yeah, that's the downside here. If we move the market capital to Cadiz, Cadiz is not going to be on a major river, so I'm a little bit torn. I guess Sevilla is not the end of the world, since 65% harbor capacity is also pretty decent. Now, also very important to note is that your marketplaces have their own separate maintenance cost aside from the trade route maintenance cost. But in almost all cases, this maintenance cost is nothing compared to the trade income that you make. So always spam marketplaces. It is very, very important. The second you've got the money, max out your marketplaces. So just build all the marketplaces you can possibly build. You're never going to go wrong with having more marketplaces. And also, you need to go to your government, hover over your crown power, because the amount of income that you get from trade doesn't all go to you. You only get a percentage of the trade income based on your crown political power. So in our case, because the crown political power is 23%, we get 23% trade income. As you progress in the campaign and you get more crown power, you're going to get even more trade income. So the end goal as you progress is obviously to get more and more crown political power, to get more trade income as consequence. In our case here, we're making 46 off of trade income, with maintenance for the 64 markets being 5.51 ducats, but it could be a lot more than that if we had more trade capacity, more trade routes, better established, as well as more political power. I also want to make a separate note here when it comes to building based countries that are trade nations, like the Hanseatic League as the start of the campaign. You get some unique mechanics such as the trade maintenance minus 25% from the Hanseatic Merchant Federation, and the trade capacity plus 50%, as well as maintenance again reduced by minus 25%, and trade income increased by 25%. So despite having 33% estate power, you don't get 33% trade income. You get a lot more due to this extra Merchant Republic government reform. There's other modifiers that can also double down on that. So once you have your trade established, you end up with a lot more money from day one. We're getting right now 34 ducats at the cost of 5 ducats maintenance for the Hanseatic contour, and whatever it costs us for the trade capacity used right now by our nation. Take note, these kind of nations also have their unique buildings. The Hanseatic contour that gives trade capacity to owner can be built outside of your nation, because this is not a nation that exists. It's technically a non-nation. So you can build your Hanseatic contours in other nations as long as you have the relations with them, and as long as it's of course a town or city. And since we are talking about the Hanseatic League, do you guys want me to do a Hanseatic video? Because I kind of feel like maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea, which should be a fairly fun different playstyle. Let me know. Now, I really do hope you guys learned something from today's video. If you did, do me a favor and subscribe, leave all those notifications on to get notified when I release more mechanics guide. I really want to get to 250,000 by the end of the year. I'm still hopeful, even though I know it's probably not going to happen. And if you haven't gotten EU5 or any Paradox game, use my link. I get a commission on every purchase. I really would appreciate it. Love you, and I'll see you in the next one.